Greetings and welcome back to another discussion. Today I am joined by someone who is going to be offering an interesting perspective on the notion of sperm banks. Now, this gentleman actually worked at a sperm bank. He had some fairly extensive experience there, and interesting observations that you could say are based on the general thrust of society as pertains to women and the way we treat women and men, which is obviously very different. So, as the title implies, at the sperm bank. Thank you for joining me again. What, if you wanted to make some initial observations about your experience there, how would you go about that?
First of all, thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure. I always enjoy these. And I would say my first ever observations are very similar to what you pointed out. There's a massive disparity in treatment. And I mean, you can see this in many different ways. And I think summing it up overall before we dive more deeply into it, sperm bank and artificial insemination technology, IVF technology, all of that essentially allows for a complete stripping down of all like realistic barriers when it comes to finding a mate, right? So I mean, if you're a woman, you can flip through a catalog. You're not realistically limited by the same things you would do or be limited by normally in the mating market. And so when you can learn a lot about a system when you remove all restraints from it and see what people do. And so I think sperm banks and then obviously artificial insemination, all that is a wonderfully clear window into what women would do and also what men do as well, when completely stripped of all restraints and barriers, and the results are fascinating.
Maybe we can go a little bit more into that.
Of course.
How do the women? I mean, first off, let's get a kind of archetype. Well, maybe there's not an archetype, but if there is, or maybe the typical female that you encountered in your employment at this place, what type of person, female, would typically be there?
Right, I can't speak in specifics.
Obviously, but generally speaking,
both because of
and maybe
right,
ethnicity.
Now the reasons for that being like not necessarily legal obligations, but there are moral obligations in there as well, and then employment obligations.
I'm
of course, I can speak vaguely though. I mean, being frank, it's really two kinds of people. It's women who have devoted most of their lives to professional careers or working. Actually, three, we'll say, and so they tend to be in the 30s range. Lesbians frequently use it as well for obvious reasons, and then also people for whatever reasons have had difficulty finding a partner in order to make a child. Those are the three kinds of people. But I would say the largest and probably the biggest bankroll over that is the type of woman who's had a long career and as a result they've accumulated a significant amount of money, or at least have good cash flow, which makes sense because this isn't a cheap enterprise. And they want to have a kid without the hassle of courtship, or maybe they're beyond the point in their lives where they can do that. And so they turn to technology to do that. Now that's separate too. I mean, there are some people where let's say they're married a second time and they need the assistance of fertility treatments to get pregnant with their partner, which is perfectly fine. I mean, that's a separate thing. Both of them are fine, obviously, but that's a separate issue and a separate field than someone who's artificially inseminated by a sperm donor they don't know versus someone who needs the assistance of fertility treatments to get pregnant with their partner. I mean, obviously, those are two different things when we're talking about genetic relation. And so that's essentially it. Those are the three groups, and obviously all three of them have vastly different motivations for doing so. But the common factor among these people is it tends to be people who don't have a male partner unless their male partner is infertile, which is a topic we can get to later, and people who have a lot of discretionary income and have just decided, sometimes on a whim, sometimes not, that they want to have a kid, and then this is when they turn to technology than other people.
Interesting. Now, you said it's not a cheap enterprise.
No.
Are you? Could you disclose approximately how much these types of things cost?
Right. It's very variable because you're dealing with for better or for worse fragile biology. There's no guarantee of success. It depends on the treatment too. But I think the thing people are most interested in would be artificial insemination from a donor that the recipient doesn't know. And the price of that, it depends. So like you have to do it in multiple attempts, right? And each attempt will run you, I mean, depending on the place and what you're going for and how many cycles you're running through, about $2,000 to $5,000 per attempt. It could take you one attempt, or it could take you 10 attempts. It varies person to person, but you can quickly see this running into the tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to do this, it's going to cost you quite a bit. But if you're a professional, you've been working in some office job, and you maybe have a pet, and no family members or anything else in your lives, you can afford it. Especially if you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, you can definitely afford it.
What does the price vary in accordance with the quote unquote quality of the sperm? You could say.
No, it doesn't at all, right? So, as far as I know, actually, all of sperm are the same. Now, that being said, the general statistic in the industry is that only 1% of sperm is actually even accepted into the reservoir, if you will. But I mean, even from that 1% of all people who try to donate, I mean, the people who select the sperm are choosy too. I mean, just because you get your sperm into the program when you're donating doesn't mean that anyone will ever select it. And then on top of that, it's not like you'll even be notified if yours is selected. So you have a hard way of knowing. But no, there's no, you don't, the free market hasn't quite penetrated enough to the point where different types of sperm are valued more than others. I could see in a total dystopian future where maybe some sperm would be worth more than others. I can see it moving towards that. But at the moment, no, they all cost the same. It's the technology and the process is what incurs the cost, not so much the sample you're being inseminated with.
But at the same time, women's own selection bias and the type of quote unquote man that they want to be the father, pseudo father, progenitor, whatever, that does seem to be a very salient factor.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And actually, before you can even get to that, it's important to note that there are two big groups of people where they either don't have a partner or they don't have a partner that they can conceive with. And so I can see, it's been described as, I can see the benefits of artificial insemination for the woman because unlike adoption, you do have a genetic component of relation to the offspring. It's just your male partner that doesn't. So I understand the appeal of that. It's significantly more expensive than artificial insemination, but you do have a genetically related component to that. Absolutely, yeah. In terms of women's standards, I mean, I can agree. You can see them expressed by both when they select a sample, which in the case of what I've observed is you flip through a catalog, and these catalogs are actually very, 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 very detailed. They will tell you more than any resume or CV will tell you. So I mean, but it makes sense, right? Because reproduction is the ultimate act, and you want to be very choosy. If you want, we can get into the qualifications to even make into that catalog in the first place, and you'll see they're very indicative of the desire of the people who wish to inseminate themselves, which makes sense. But at the same time, too, when they're restrict of all restraints, they can get quite crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be probably one of the most important things to get into. What are the qualifications?
Right, yeah, and so, I mean, first, before even starting off, they vary by race. This is one field of science where they have to be realistic about it. I mean, there are major differences between whatever the buzzword term is these days, genetic populations. So, for example, height, as you can imagine, is the most important qualification. It's always listed first on the long list of things you need to qualify for. In fact, I usually see it before sperm motility, which really tells you something. It really, really tells you something. Excuse me. And so the minimum height for men who are white is 5'10". That's the minimum. And some of them, I see the standards moving up every year. I think it's approaching the 5'11" threshold, but at the moment I believe it's 5'10".
So basically, now, if I might interrupt briefly,
yes,
some guy is 5'8", but earns high six figures and, I don't know, is well known in his community. He would be a lesser pick compared to a guy who earned half or even 3 times as little, but happens to be 6'1".
Correct, and you can see that in action, right? Height. I would argue, just based on what I've observed and those the list of qualifications, is the most important. Now that being said, it is tempered by the fact that also many of them require a minimum undergraduate degree, which is kind of like a competency and employment filter of sorts. But generally speaking, yeah, I mean, you could be literally the most high status leader of the community, and if you're below the 5'10" threshold, it wouldn't be accepted. It's not worthy of being stored as a sample for other people to use, mind you. And that's the most important. And I don't think that's really the from the cause of the sperm banks or the fertility clinics themselves. I think it's just a desire on part of the recipients, right? And the recipients, when they go through and select the catalog, From what I've observed, for people who are wondering, in an environment where they're just flipping through a catalog, they can pick whoever they want. There's no restraints whatsoever. There are no restraints, I should say. Height is the primary concern and consideration, and money is second.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't come as a surprise to people.
Well, certainly not my audience. My audience knows you could say what women are interested in.
Right.
What are some other considerations? You said that there are quote unquote ethnic considerations.
Right, and actually this will even still keep on the height factor. It's been observed that Asian men and even Hispanics too aren't really, just to be kind of colloquial, fans of contributing to sperm banks. So the qualifications for them are actually much lower, simply because there isn't enough diversity of samples across pretty much all clinics I've ever seen. So for there, you can go as low as 5'8". With those groups, but that's more of a sample size problem. Speaking genetically, the standards are actually much harsher if you're an African American, if you're an Ashkenazi Jew, for which people can guess the reasons. One being heart problems, sickle cell anemia, and then the predilection to, or predisposition, I should say, to genetic disorders. In the case of Ashkenazi Jews, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but which ones those would be, but. There are different standards per race, and they're all tempered by the fact that they suffer from different genetic issues or maybe different genetic predilections, and also different average heights too. Hence the different standards for Asian men and Hispanic men when trying to contribute to a sperm bank.
Interesting. So they don't really pull any punches.
It's all to the point. They accept every single aspect of like racially based science at its face. Man, they have to. And it's interesting too. I mean, I was working there a long time ago before this was before like Trump was on anyone's minds. I worked there a long, long time ago. So really, the whole like racism, race realism debate was still like in its earlier incarnations. I think this was during like the early Obama years. I worked there. Things were very, very different back then. But every racial aspect was just taken at face value, and it's very interesting to see. That's one aspect of science, just working at a complete acceptance of the facts. And I understand why they have to do that, is because, again, it's the ultimate reproductive act is in their hands and their responsibility. So they take it all at face value. And being frank, the end result is that it's difficult to get a sample if you're an Ashkenazi Jew. And it's not even, you can't even necessarily, they do genetic screenings, right? So you may not even necessarily have the genetic disorders that would disqualify you, but if you're a carrier, or it's been determined that, like, if you have some, I forget exactly how the science works, but if there's some kind of interaction you could have with a potential partner, you're disqualified.
But that seems to be almost independent of the ethnicity. That's more that they if they see anything they think is dodgy, you'll be disqualified, independent of your race.
Yeah, but they also acknowledge that there's a greater probability in certain genetic populations. So in some cases, it's at the discretion of the clinics. Some cases, they just don't accept them from those ethnic groups, period. They just don't bother with it.
You'd think that they would be sued for racism and or quote-unquote anti-Semitism.
You would think, but I mean, it's women's reproductive choices at work here, and as far as I know, no one ever has. I mean, you could see where again, you could see a case to be made for a lawsuit for discrimination, but at the same time, I mean, who discriminates more than women?
Yeah. Well, I mean, women's preferences trump everything else, including.
And I understand that too. I mean, if you want to have a baby put in you, I understand why you'd want to be discriminating. I mean, it's a fairly big commitment, but that's the reason why. Again, it seems that sex and gender and all that trumps the race card. This is yet another example.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I mean, all that said, I'm not sure if women are really thinking this through thoroughly, in the sense that it seems to me, at least, that they're just operating off of instinct in terms of their choices.
Correct. Yeah, no, if I could expand on that, the people who come into the clinic, I would say, they aren't like thinking about like the macro level of interactions there. But however, many of these clinics are actually they're corporate operations, like they're massive, like they're chains on par with McDonald's, right? They have international operations, branches everywhere across the world, and they collect lots and lots of data. I mean, none of this is really regulated whatsoever, and so you have really smart people there working in the back office, and then they figure out like down to a T exactly what people want, and they adjust their standards, and it's all very much cataloged, and they have an impressive amount of data on that, and so very smart people have worked very hard to adjust it to meet just the blind instinct of people coming in.
Interesting.
Now we're also, if really quick, none of these qualifications wouldn't be as interesting to other people, but I did want to be thorough when I said the qualifications to become a sperm donor, because some people may be interested, especially if they fit the bill, and you are compensated for it. You can, I mean, if you devote yourself to it, it's pretty easy work, no pun intended, and you can pull $20,000 a year if you're committed to it and you're a good sample. But other qualifications, include like you have to be between the ages of 19 and 38.
I encountered a guy a while back who he was kind of a mishmash of what Barbarossa might have called back in the alpha male primitive and something else, and he was bragging about how half his income, he was I think 6'4" or something, came from.
He would do well in the catalog.
Yeah, just dropping sperm at sperm banks, and he didn't. But here's the thing is why I think that it's questionable that. Yes, he's tall, but every interaction I had with the guy, well, frankly speaking, the guy wasn't that bright. He was maybe not a complete. There was just something off about him.
The recipients wouldn't care, but continue.
Well, that's the whole point. The recipients don't care, but at some point in time, you think, okay, he's 6'4", he's 6'5", that's great. What other? I guess you could say qualities are they looking for beyond money and height?
Yeah, and I'll list the like the booklet ones, and I'll get to the ones like the people actually look for. So just running through quickly, you have to have exclusively female sexual partners. So they just don't bother with homosexual people whatsoever. That's another avenue of discrimination. I mentioned the college degree before, and they do STD screenings, which makes sense. In fact, STD screenings are the only thing the FDA mandates for sperm banks. Everything else is just like an industry self-regulation. The only thing they care about is STD screening, at least on the government side. In terms of qualifications, they have a lot to look through, right? So you provide a family history, a list of what your family members are doing, pictures from childhood, current pictures, previous occupation, previous girlfriends, like preferences down to what kind of food you eat. And so, to answering your question now, again, height is the primary concern. But then after that, it immediately jumps to like more qualitative things, like I like his eyes, or he seems like he's really interesting, or like I bet he has a motorcycle, things like that, or the fact that he has a motorcycle is another one of those. And then finally, I've at least I've observed, or from what I've heard around the area, is that money is used as a tiebreaker. So, for example, if you're a recipient and you're flipping through a booklet, for example, a difference in $5,000 or $10,000 in annual income might be the deciding factor between two samples to use. So it's kind of like it's like a liquid tiebreaker, if you will. But no, beyond height, I would say, unfortunately, this isn't very useful in terms of specificity, but what people are looking for in terms of being a recipient they're very qualitative. The factors they're looking for. So like hair color, perceived, like how they perceive their personality.
I'd imagine that male pattern baldness, any history of that means you're off the list, right?
Oh, actually, yeah, I completely forgot about that. Yeah, the one I worked in particular, that was a disqualifier, but that's typically not listed on websites. The lists on websites for qualifications they're probably a tenth of what they actually require in person. But yeah, male pattern baldness would be a disqualifier.
There's something I have to remark on throughout all of this, and that is, whatever people might think of official prostitution or the more unofficial types, that is relationships and marriage, I have to remark that men, of course, are pilloried for that, and it's a horrible thing. And yet, here are women who probably wouldn't. Well, they, for whatever reason, they missed the train, establishing the highest criteria when they themselves are well past the wall, probably, or at least somewhat past the wall, not very attractive, and using their money to do something. I think it was just far more significant than basically a brief sexual financial transaction.
Imagine too, like a sexual financial transaction where the guy is discriminating, right? Like, oh, like they would say, oh, I want a white girl, or oh, I want a girl with black hair. Like that's taboo versus someone flipping through a book and then disqualifying someone because they don't have a motorcycle.
Yeah, yeah, or they're half an inch off or whatever. It's astounding, and I think the irony, I would think at least the irony is lost to the women themselves.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's very ironic that you. Generally speaking, I'll remark on averages and what I've generally observed. The type of people, things happen for a reason for the most part, and I mean, for whatever reason, the type of people there are the type of people who didn't end up in relationships. So whether it be bad personalities or prioritizing careers, et cetera, like a natural sequence of events caused. I mean, it's a varied group of people, but many of them fit your stereotype exactly. Not as attractive, crappy personalities, etc. However, through this, with just a little bit of money, or in this case, a significant amount of money for some people, they can access the top tier of genetic samples or sperm samples, I should say, with with no qualifications on their side whatsoever. And so, not only are they enacting a kind of like dysgenic selection process, I'm reminded of that video you made a long time ago about Fisherian Runaway, I believe that's what it was called.
Runaway, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Runaway. Where just to recap for your audience, was that or these elk, I think in Scotland or
Irish, ancient Irish elk, yes,
ancient Irish elk. They kept selecting for larger and larger horns, or I think they were horns or antlers. There
antlers,
we go.
Yep.
Yeah, and they the selection made the antlers become so huge. I think the species couldn't function because they could barely lift their heads. Correct?
None. It was more to do with mineral depletion. That the formation of the antlers required various minerals that were being diverted from the rest of the body, and this led to, it's speculated at least with some degree of evidence, to the long term to these negative results. Yeah.
Right, and so even if you have like lower tier people on the the sexual hierarchy there, selecting for that, I mean, I view it as dysgenic. Selecting for increasingly taller and taller and just hulking like mouth breathing morons. Like that kind of pressure is not what's going to get us off this planet, and you can see it in action here.
Well, I might be making a video on this at some point in time, but there's some evidence to suggest that the height burst that the Netherlands experienced in the last 200 years, because it's fairly recent, has been a net negative for health in terms of coronary problems, cancer incidents, and other things. So, as well as joint and ligament problems. So it's one of those things where there's a preference on the part of women, understandably, given their evolution, for height, but taken to the extreme end, there are diminishing returns, and at some point in time, there are almost no returns. And I think the whole reproductive business is, in some sense, when you hand over the power to women operating purely off of instinct, it really becomes a case study in the law of diminishing returns.
Absolutely.
They want extreme high, like this. I like the term mouth breathing moron, or smooth brain, as they say these days. This hulking smooth brain that was bragging about his income on a Discord server, and the guy, maybe he was just acting, but I couldn't detect any redeeming feature apart from his alleged height, being 6'4".
That's enough to make him appealing.
More than that, he would brag. I mean, this is the thing. This is that type of behavior when he was bragging about how he convinced his girlfriend of being in an open relationship, which is it's his business, and how he's basically a kind of gigolo. Now, you'd think most women would be concerned about that type of behavior, but I guess not.
Why should they? They want that shot at what they perceive to be top tier genetics.
Yeah.
Anything for a shot.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But the perception can be deceiving, and it's funny that I'm trying to think. I can't think of any, but is there any equivalent in the United States or in the Western world of let's call them womb clinics? Where
no, unfortunately not. It's an interesting thought experiment, but no, there's no womb clinic per se. You can donate eggs. But they just want eggs, period. There's no selection other than obviously health related factors. There's no selection on donating eggs. But like what you're kind of getting at is like the concept of like an artificial womb or something like that. And obviously that's not on the table
Well,
right
not even that, but an actual business practice where women can, of their own semi-free will, as I'd say, look, I will be a womb for 9 months. You'll pay me a shit ton of money, and I will do this for you, blah, blah, blah. And then you could, I mean, wealthy, very, very wealthy, because it would be much more expensive than the other.
It's surrogacy you were getting at.
Basically, I'm using the term womb clinic tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, a kind of market-driven surrogacy that's freely accessible to anyone who can afford it.
Not that I know of, but this is actually out of my purview. I worked primarily on the male donation side for sperm related. I haven't worked in anything related to that, and as far as I know, you only can approach that from, I guess, like surrogate pregnancies and also egg donations.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to that very much, but I mean, we don't know yet, right? So it would be very interesting to see how men's ability to impute their own preferences may or may not be limited. Right, because we can see from the female side when it comes to like artificial insemination via sperm donors, there is no restriction on like the caliber of the recipient. Right, they can just select anything they want, and when they select anything they want, it tends to be I think the ideal, if I had to guess based on my observations in time, is like a 6'3" through 6'5" doctor who has a multi-six-figure income. But obviously that's exceedingly rare. But I would say that's probably the prime sample and the people looking through there, and also a full head of hair and all that kind of stuff too.
And here's another thing I'm pretty sure would happen for the a kind of freely accessible market-driven surrogacy clinic, and that the SJWs or the whoever, however you want to describe them. Can you imagine if men gave a preference for, I don't know, short East Asians or something like that? This is
well, you probably would see that, to be honest.
It's certainly possible, but what do you think? And they said they don't want black women or white women for that matter.
We see that in online dating. I mean, that absolutely would be imputed onto it. And look how they react just to online dating, right? I can't imagine.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that they would get the local, state, and or federal government involved in a way that none of these institutions are involved in the reverse. It's absolutely absurd. I mean, and it really is a kind of like a double-decker effect, because on the one hand, you have free abortion clinics and all of these things out there for women to just use. I mean, women have absolute power over reproduction in that realm. So
right.
If you get pregnant, you can take a morning after pill. You can there's nothing that's going to stop you. You can do whatever you want. It's quote unquote your body, your choice. And on top of that, assuming you have the money, you can be as discriminatory as you want. And it's shocking that in every other context, the things you describe would incur and invoke cries of racism and anti-Semitism, and yet...
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I mean, like people from different races do make it into the category, but I'd imagine just based on industry research and the data available, for women, you can see overwhelming racial discrimination when it comes to sperm samples.
Well, and here's the thing, though. What I find fascinating, in an ironic sense, of course, is that you wonder where are the social justice warriors here? Where are the people that are crying about racism and anti-Semitism in every corner of the internet and the world, for that matter? No, that's fine. It's fine if women make these decisions. But some guy in Scotland who has a joke with his dog, I think it was from Scotland.
Ridiculous,
yeah. It's
he shouldn't have done that, but I don't think the punishment.
It was unwise in terms of, because the consequences were pretty clear, I think. But maybe he wasn't aware of the separate issue. But the point is that I think we're really seeing something that is, how should I put it, shockingly transparent in terms of its discrimination. And you could argue that I'm going to be neutral on this. If they want to do that, they want to do that. But on every other metric of society, people will be strongly opposed to it, and that's an understatement.
Yeah, let me jump in here really quick. Before this talk, I actually spent an hour trying to find one example of an article decrying the fact that Sally, 4 out of 10 office manager, decided she only wanted a white guy sperm sample. I couldn't find one article complaining that, and I spent the better part of an hour just trying to find one to bring up for the sake of this conversation. And so, I mean, there's a combination of factors here, right? So, like, I mean, the whole artificial insemination sperm donor thing still kind of is a cultural taboo, and most people aren't, like, they don't talk about it on a daily basis. That's what makes it so interesting, too. But it's not in the public eye, which may contribute to this, but I think the real reason is that, I mean, who's going to want to, impute or desire to control women's preferences and, control over their own bodies? We'll see about the reverse when and if it happens when it comes to men.
It is, without question, the greatest sacred cow in our society. Nobody touches the quote-unquote WQ, the woman question, and leaves unscathed, or they can't touch it at all. We saw what happened with James Damore. It's disconcerting long term, just because you're giving people that are just engines of the most primitive instincts.
Correct.
Probably one of the greatest powers anyone can have, which is the power of creating new life in any way they so choose, based on a whim, just based on the amount of money they have. Now, you could say, well, it's a free market. Well, sure, but there are all kinds of activities that, let's say you're a multimillionaire, you're still restricted. I mean, just because you're a multimillionaire, and I'm not saying it's the same thing, it's an analogy, but not a perfect one, that you can't engage in human trafficking. It's illegal. I mean,
right.
People don't sanction it. They don't think it's an appropriate thing to do. In most places, prostitution or escorts or whatever, that's also not a thing. So there are limitations. It's fascinating how women get an absolute free pass on this front, but in other ways, and I mean,
the only reason, sorry to interrupt, the only reason money is a restriction is because the technology is still relatively new. I mean, that's just the flat cost.
Yeah.
When and if the technology gets better, the price will be even less of a barrier. It's not even so much like a societal imposition, but a technological one. That's the only reason why money is a barrier right now. But please continue.
Yeah. And once the costs are dropped, I'm pretty sure you'll see women of all kinds doing, I mean, if anything, and it's another negative, it contributes to more single motherdom, I would imagine.
Correct. I mean, people who choose to do this, they're an overwhelming minority. I think it's only like 50 to 60,000 a year. It's not that common, but probably because of the money barrier, if I had to guess.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if it were as much as as it was cheap as I don't know, getting a doctor's checkup, it probably would look a little bit different, but it certainly does contribute to single motherhood, I would imagine, and everyone knows that's not a good thing. Well, apart from politicians, it's the hardest job in the world, and the best job, apparently.
I won't comment on that too much. I think it's a valuable technology, and I don't want to fault people too much for their own desires. I just like to catalog and bring attention to them.
Oh, well, I'm not, I can't fault people for, we're all animals and apes here, so...
If this were reversed, I guarantee a man would express a preference for breast size, probably, racial components as well.
Oh, yeah, they would, I could actually call East Asians, maybe white women, with the waist to hip ratio. Black women would be underrepresented. Jewish women would be underrepresented.
And you're not imputing your own preferences necessarily onto that. But if you look at the data, look with online dating. I mean, that's a very similar comparison.
Yeah, absolutely.
Selection of people.
It's reflective of basically some surveys and the general trend. So yeah, you would get those kinds of preferences. But I guarantee you that. First off, it wouldn't exist, but even if it did, it would get shut down because of misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism. Take your pick. It would not exist for a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting, right? Because we have the technology, and this is an example of technology that would be of great assistance to eugenics. But what it is like technologically assisted and what's the word for speeding up? It's being sped up.
Acceleration.
Acceleration, there we go, which is completely undirected. It's pure accelerationism with like, no quality control or barriers whatsoever. Than do you have STDs? Yes or no? That's all the government requires. Everything else is a self-regulation from the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I suppose the silver lining is that it's not. It's a rare thing, as you pointed out. Was it a couple of tens of thousand a year for now? Yeah. I mean, if market predictions are correct, then I guess just like with cell phones, it'll go down in price and become increasingly accessible. But
there's big money being put into it, at least last when I worked there. They're on the cusp of doing some great things. And it's like, again, sperm clinics and fertility clinics are like the secret McDonald's of the medical world. I mean, they're going everywhere. There's good money coming into it. And there's some impressive things on the horizon with that, at least last time I was there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, again, I would say I commiserate, but, we're all creatures of instinct, and women are going to express their... See, I wouldn't really have any issue with this if the equivalent in terms of long-term surrogacy clinics existed for men.
Right.
But clearly that is not a thing.
Well, at that point, though, we're talking about like the total breakdown of standard human relationships then. Just like Cadillac selection for the entire thing. It's quite the this dystopian future.
I'd argue that we're already in that stage. Internet dating is a huge thing. I remember with internet dating when it was kind of an odd thing to do, and you were an oddball if you did it, and now it's completely normalized. And more to the point, anyone with experience with internet dating knows that it is officially the catalog. You're scoping the person out. You're looking for all the
Correct.
the markers of whatever your preference might be, and then you get generalized results where that seem to correlate with human preferences, and there might be a video on that forthcoming. But yeah, so that we're already at that stage where it's just a catalog of choice, as it were. It's just it would further accelerate that, I think.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a good transition point to get to, because you have to wonder about what about the kids who are conceived by artificial insemination and don't know their fathers. I mean, what are the responses to that? And just getting into it quickly as a general overview, children who are conceived by artificial insemination, whether caused by the fact that they are effectively a test tube baby or if they don't have their father in the picture, they exhibit more mental and substance abuse related problems than people who are mixed race. Just as a comparison, so it causes a great deal of problems. Now, I have actually some statistics I found here before this talk. So 2/3 of adult donors agree with the statement. Offspring of adult donors, so people who are children of artificial inseminations. My sperm donor is half of who I am, but they say that they have identity-related problems related to their conception, and then they're also, I think, 1.5 times as likely to engage and struggle with substance abuse, among other problems, and also 1.5 times more likely to report depression and other mental-related problems. And I mean, this goes on and on and on, and they attribute these things to either not having contact with their father or having identity issues related to not knowing their father, knowing that there are many people out there with the father sample in them. So, I mean, the end result for people who do choose to take this decision are people who struggle with, again, like psychological issues and identity issues related to the fact that they were conceived artificially and their father isn't in the picture. So you have to consider about the societal cost of that as well when you're producing a class of people who struggle with the problem as a result of being medically created.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must be a puzzling thing when, it's one thing if you find out your father died or something, but it turns out that you're just this product of the incredibly mechanistic, mechanical series of decisions, which is fair enough. But well, given the lack of involvement these days of fathers and children's lives through no fault of their own, of course, it's.
I would say this is as far as you can take it, though, in terms of isolation, separation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely out there, and I wonder if the women who engage in this take that into consideration.
I've never observed it on the clinic side. I don't. I've not once observed a question about will my kid be different, or what's some of the information around that? I've never once observed anyone ask about that.
Pop the kid out, good enough.
I can't impute. Maybe they did the research at home. I mean, like it is a big decision, but I've never observed anyone ask questions related to that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had looked at some stuff. This is, I think, because it was taking a while to get this talk, get around to the talk, because just schedule. But I think I was looking at some, I guess, testimonies of children from children who were conceived this way, and it. I mean, it was kind of mixed, but for the most part, it was negative.
Yeah, I've observed that too.
Yeah.
Many women choose to inform their child very late in life, um, and they just think that informing their child in their 20s that they were conceived by artificial insemination is enough, and they don't bother to help them through. Not all of them, obviously, but many of them don't help them through the acceptance process. They just think informing them is enough, but many people don't realize, because this is still like a relatively new and unknown class of people being created by this. Many people don't know that when you tell them or inform them, when they find out, you're at the beginning of a series of identity related problems that you'll have to work through. Many people just they don't realize that and don't properly deal with these people because they have special emotional needs as a result of their creation.
Yeah. The created. The
I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying not to be like it's like the.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I think it's
difficult.
Actually,
it's such a new concept.
It's a funny term, the created.
Yeah.
I think I'll use that one henceforth. So, with respect to the created, I wonder if it wouldn't be just a better thing if they were never informed in the first place.
I can't. I've only been. I didn't even consider the outcome myself until very recently. This talk inspired me to look into the outcomes of these artificial inseminations, mainly because it's not my concern. I'm never going to be artificially inseminated, but it's really hard to say either way. It's such a new and minor thing. Just the lack of information, especially standardized information, really limits your ability to understand what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brave new world, new horizon, etc., etc. But it is obviously reflective of the general thrust of our society, which gives women a free or sometimes expensive pass to do whatever they want.
The thrust of our society is removing all restraints and barriers as quickly as possible. But many people don't consider the consequences. I did find. And this is mostly anecdotal, but I do notice that just based on a survey of what I was able to find researching this, many people, not even just the children with their emotional problems, many of the people who do choose to be inseminated this way, I can't say a percentage, but many of them are dissatisfied with the quality of their offspring. And I noticed mainly the articles I was reading on that, they tend to blame the donor of the clinic, or the donor or the clinic, I should say, without perhaps taking into account, like maybe you, as the woman, are the cause of the what you perceive to be the lower quality outcome. They focus almost entirely on like what they perceive to be the genetic quality of either the medical process or the sperm donor, but they never take into consideration the account. Maybe they transmitted their own problems just as much as well.
It's fascinating how somebody who's engaging in this procedure couldn't take into account the fact that it takes two to tango, and that they're contributing their genetic material as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you can have the best seasoning in the world, but if the roast is ruined, it's ruined.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's something that it's something that I wonder how that will play out. Actually, if women are actually getting that upset at the results, and it turns out that to protect themselves, the clinics have to say, well, look, you're not exactly top quality yourself,
They would never say that. What they do is they surround themselves with like the walls of Constantinople level of paperwork protecting them.
Right. Well, I mean, they all they need is medical genetic evidence. You say, well, the guy was A-OK, but you had this problem or something.
It's hard to determine with current medical science, but I mean, just anecdotally speaking, that could be the reason why the offspring was not to your satisfaction. But most people don't consider that.
Yeah, it's.
All right, if you're mixing Coors Light with the finest craft beer from Germany, sorry, you ruined it.
Yeah, and It is.
Assuming you care about, again, like, how you perceive to be good genetic qualities, right? So I mean, if you're averaging heights and complain like, well, my sperm donor was 6'5", why is my kid 5'11"? Well, I
Yeah.
mean, you're 5'2".
Yeah. Yeah.
There's only so much that can be done.
Yeah. Exactly. And these women are. Let's be honest. Very attractive women have the pick whatever they usually want in terms of male partners.
Correct.
These types of women are typically unlikely to pursue long-term careers because they're going to be remunerated through their existence, basically.
Right.
I recently brought up the previous month, International Women's Month, where if you get started up on Twitch and you're a female between basically college to graduate age or your high school to graduate age, they'll pay you money to account for those hardware costs and what have you.
That's right. We discussed that. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a young, attractive female, your existence will secure your, at least before you hit the wall, will secure your financial status. But if you're only average looking or below average, you're gonna, in some sense, you're almost like a man. You're gonna have to work for your living, and it is. Well, I mean, that's how the chips fall. But you're gonna have fewer options, and it's a consequence of, on average, you not being really the best genetic specimen. So I would be very surprised if the female contribution is actually as a positive or a eugenic one as the male.
It's not eugenic.
Yeah.
But I can't say that like specifically or objectively because again, this is criminally understudied.
Yeah.
No, I mean everything you were saying and everything I'm saying, just for the sake of the audience, is being imputed based on our own observations of the world. If you were to talk to people engaging this, they would attribute their decision to like a desire to control the process themselves, or independence, or just their decision to undergo a pregnancy this way because they feel like this is the best way to do it. It's the least difficult for them. And so the reasons, if you were to actually speak to some of these people, which I encourage you to do, right? So we shouldn't just be representing them without them being here. If you were to speak to them, though, they would attribute like more quality of life and emotional reasons for taking this decision.
Yeah.
Versus what we're attributing to like these kind of factors, right? These social factors, which may or may not be true. And I'm actually inclined to agree with what I've been saying, what you've been saying. However, if you were to speak to the people doing this, I don't think they would think of it that way.
Well, no, people operating purely off of instinct rarely are aware of the instincts that they're operating off. That's their kind of the hallmark of the human ape that we are. We don't really think about what's motivating our behavior. So that doesn't surprise in the slightest.
Yeah, maybe someday though, and I've only just hit the tip of the iceberg on this, but the people who are created by these and the emotional problems and the support groups they're forming, it touched me a little bit, and I hope that someday that the created will have enough of a lobbying power or some sort of regulation, or as much as I don't like the idea of regulation, but strange things are happening in this part of the world, and I hope that someday the interests and needs of the people who are created by this process are considered as well.
I think it's very unlikely that this industry will be regulated because women are at the center of it. So
and to its credit, they self-regulate very well, in my opinion, just based on observing and being all over it.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose with respect to the created, it would be, how should I put it? A matter of numbers. If the created became a major population to itself, right, then yeah, you could definitely see some issues arising. But as there aren't that too many of them to begin with, it's kind of doubtful that they will be, I guess, in the mainstream.
Yeah, generally considering though, nothing about this process based on the sorting preferences I've seen is eugenic whatsoever. It's actually, I'll make a firm stance on this. It's dysgenic.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to cover most of the basis. Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting overview of what's going on at these strange institutions. And I'm sure the audience have found this interesting, particularly those of more interested in the sort of dynamics between men and women. But none of it surprises me, I have to say. It all seems to go in line, fall in line with what we understand about men and women, and particularly women and
It
their
does seem
choices.
to confirm our observations, especially. I mean, you will find no better case study than this industry. As I said in the beginning, it represents a mating market where all restrictions and barriers, other than money, have been taken away, and you can see what happens.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
can see like the pure, unfiltered desires and motivations.
Well, yeah, and you get that to a lesser degree in with the emergence of the internet, with women in general. You know, fours and fives thinking they deserve eight, nines, and tens. It's yeah. I mean, but it's effectively that, but the women can afford, in theory, these eight, nine, 10 men. In theory,
No, they're only about $10,000 to $20,000 away.
yeah, yeah. So it's not too bad considering, especially if they've been working for years, right? So
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's perfect. That's why it's such a booming industry.
is it really wow?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Huh.
Yeah, no. There's only so much I can talk about because it's privileged information. But yeah, it's a booming industry. Like I said, it's the secret McDonald's of the medical world.
With the caveat that it probably isn't as popular as McDonald's, whereas McDonald's is everywhere. This seems to be
You'll see sperm clinics almost as much as general practitioner clinics. I mean,
really,
they're everywhere,
huh?
everywhere. You don't know it though. No one knows it. I mean, there's just millions and millions of dollars is being poured into this.
And not a single surrogacy clinic, but hey.
You can. They're just more difficult to find.
Yeah, I mean, every time I've heard about a surrogacy issue or surrogacy case, there's some issue that arises.
With liability.
Liability, the women changing their minds, all
Yeah.
these it's a big mess. So a
Yeah.
lot of guys,
Yeah. The problem is with that though is like with surrogacy, you can't purchase the womb, whereas the sperm can be purchased and becomes property of the clinic.
right? There's that too. I mean,
They're selling a product, not the person necessarily.
right. There are a lot of mediating factors when it comes to these sorts of things, but still, it is interesting that one is completely sanctioned, the other is completely taboo on average. Men go to India to get surrogates oftentimes,
It's correct.
so it's not it's an indication of the sign of our times and just how the world operates in general.
It's certainly thinking about sci-fi. It's the basis for quite an interesting futurist novel when everyone's selected this way.
Create, yeah. Welcome to the created. Yeah. Well, I think we covered most of the basics. So we're on, we have the intention to go into every little detail, and you're basically under obligation not to reveal too many details. So
That's right.
I think we've covered the most important salient points and factors, and yeah, I mean, for those of you who didn't know, that's how it is at the sperm clinic. Some new stuff there I didn't know, and some stuff I already knew. But I think I might do some own research on my own just to see what the impact of this is on children in
I
general.
encourage you.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone, well, thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I will check you out later, and I'll thank my guest for joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.